Yeah, thanks everyone for joining us today. We're really excited to be sharing this opportunity with you virtually and really appreciate those of you who are taking the time away from a beautiful sunny day where I'm located to spend the day with us virtually. So thank you for joining. I was just looking through who's here, and it's lovely to see so many familiar names. Thank you for joining us, and I hope you learn something and maybe share something you know about this region that we can learn from you about as well. So before we begin today, I wanted to take a moment to acknowledge that the lands we'll be speaking about today are the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe Nation, the people of the Three Fires, known as Ojibwe, Odawa, and Potawatomi nations, and within Treaty 72 territory. We're really thankful to the Chippewas of Saugeen or Saukeen and the Chippewas of Nawash or Neashingaming First Nations, known collectively as the Saugeen Ojibwe Nation, as the traditional keepers of this land. I know I and many of you who are joining us virtually today have had the privilege to work, play, and gather on these lands, and we acknowledge the long-standing harmful colonial history that has and continues to impact members of Indigenous communities across the Saugeen Peninsula and across what we now call Ontario. Ontario Nature is committed to collectively caring for and respecting the land, water, and animals and each other in the interests of peace and friendship and for the benefit of future generations, honoring and upholding Indigenous cultural practices, responsibilities, and inherent rights. We are honored to have developed relationships with members of Saugeen Ojibwe Nation, and I personally am really honored by those relationships that I've built. And at Ontario Nature, we're committed to working together to care for Mother Earth and heal the land. So I wanted to also mention that the land we'll be speaking about today is directly adjacent to Saugeen Ojibwe Nation reserve lands. And so open dialogue with the community has been a crucial step of the process every part of the way. And I'll speak to this later, but just wanted to mention it off the top as it's an important point. So before we get started, I just wanted to give a super quick overview of the webinar today and what you can expect. It'll be an hour in length, and we'll start off with a little bit about Ontario Nature. I know many of you are members and supporters, but for those of you who may not be familiar, just a little bit about us. An overview of our nature reserves program, and specifically some information about the Saugeen Bruce Peninsula, and the opportunity we're all here to talk about the Sauble Dunes North parcel and how you can get involved in expanding Sauble Dunes. And towards the end, Andrés and I will be chatting through some questions and also opening up to all of you for any questions you might have. So a little bit about Ontario Nature. We are an environmental charity that's been protecting wild species and wild spaces through education, conservation, and public engagement since 1931. And we are there whenever nature needs us most. Our staff is an incredible group of dedicated and passionate people who care deeply about our environment. And we're over 30 staff. We are comprised of all of you, over 130,000 members and supporters. You guide our work, you cheer us on, you sign on to action alerts, you get involved on the boots on the ground, and we couldn't do any of what we do without all of you. We also are comprised of 150 nature network groups. Many of you are part of those groups and are involved in so many different ways through all of our conservation programming, including being stewards of our 26 nature reserves that protect over 3,000 hectares. And of course, we have one really great mailing list that many of you are probably on, and that's how you heard about this webinar today. So thank you for subscribing to that. And if you haven't already, we encourage you to do so. So a little bit about our nature reserves program. So as I mentioned, we care for 26 nature reserves. over 3,100 hectares of land across southern Ontario, all the way from Pelee Island in the south to the Ottawa River Valley in the east, up the Saugeen Peninsula, up Manitoulin Island in St. Joseph Island as well. And you'll see that our highest concentration of nature reserves is actually on the Saugeen Bruce Peninsula. And the property we'll be speaking about today is the arrow pointed there, Sauble Dunes Nature Reserve. Our properties basically help safeguard habitat for endangered plants and animals and culturally important species, protects biological diversity. We set benchmarks for scientific research through many collaborative research projects and create opportunities for recreation and nature appreciation for many of you. And one thing to mention too is about half of our properties are publicly accessible through trail networks, and 3 of them have wheelchair accessible trails, one of which is not too far from Sauble Dunes. It's Petro Point, just north, number 8 on the map you can see here. So if you're interested in visiting some of our nature reserves, please visit our website. Okay. So I know this map may not be very exciting for those of you who aren't into geology, but I think it's really fascinating. I know rocks can seem boring, but they really lay the foundation for all the plants, animals, and all other beings that people get so excited about that we see on the land. And so this map basically illustrates the diversity of bedrock geology on the Saugeen Bruce Peninsula, and its incredibly diverse geology translates to a diversity of habitats and topography that this area is best known for. And so now I want you to take a minute to imagine that this area looked completely different than what you might imagine or see on the peninsula today. It was a warm, shallow water sea 450 million years ago, known as the Michigan Basin, and comprised of large coral reefs that were composed of calcium, built up over many millions of years. And so back then, this land was down near the equator, and over the last 200 million years, this land has moved north, and now we're about halfway between the equator and the North Pole. And the sea levels decreased and the climate changed, and now we're in a temperate climate. And so the glaciers that covered this area were over a kilometer thick, and as they receded, they carved features along the peninsula. And as the seabed dried, this transformed into dolomite, which is similar to limestone but harder. And so that's kind of what you think of when you think of the Saugeen Peninsula now. It's comprised by these geological processes that have occurred over millennia. And this exposed cliff, the Niagara Escarpment that the Saugeen Peninsula is really well known for, kind of traverses the entire eastern shore of the peninsula. And right here you can see a picture of the cliff feature at Malcolm Bluff Shores Nature Reserve. But we're gonna take a veer from this and highlight some of the other habitats that maybe the Saugeen Peninsula isn't known for outside of the residents and visitors of the area, that shine equally as bright and are equally as important for the species that depend on these landscapes. And so you can see that there's a huge diversity of habitats found on the peninsula beyond the flashy escarpment. And you'll see on the top left, there's some bedrock alvar pavement that leads out onto the Lake Huron shoreline on the western side at our Baptist Harbor Nature Reserve. On the top right, you'll see an example of one of the many islands off of the Lake Huron shoreline on the west side of the peninsula, and this property is Lyle Island. There's some staff doing some surveys after kayaking over to the island. On the bottom left, you'll see a fen, an important wetland ecosystem that supports many species at risk plants and reptiles and amphibians. And on the bottom right, you'll see this sandy dune forested ecosystems that we'll be talking a bit about today at our Sauble Dunes Nature Reserve. And so many of these habitats are globally significant and rare and support a great diversity of species. And the Saugeen Peninsula is characterized by actually a high percentage of wetland habitat compared to the rest of southern Ontario. And so it's really important that we continue to protect and care for these wetland ecosystems that are unfortunately dwindling across southern Ontario due to a number of different pressures. And so Sauble Dunes Nature Reserve, which we'll be speaking about today, is close to the Sauble River and the Lake Huron shoreline. And as I mentioned, with the glaciers retreating over time, it really shaped this landscape. As they retreated, they kind of laid down these ancient shorelines of dunes that have created the dune ecosystems that we see today that are completely forested with mixed mature coniferous forests. And the depressions in between the sand dunes are incredible. There are these niches of wetland habitat that support breeding habitat for many amphibians that we'll be speaking about later on today as well. And so you can imagine that within these landscapes, you're having a more kind of arid dune landscape that's forested all the way down to some wetland habitats. And that's really crammed into a small area. So you have these incredible ecological niches that support a great diversity of species. And so they really are thriving and alive, and not maybe what you think of when you think of dune ecosystems outside of this context. And so here's a map of our potential acquisition. So the property in red is our current Sauble Dunes Nature Reserve. It was donated to us in 2012, and we're now looking to expand this property through purchase of the land in yellow. And so it's, again, directly north of our current nature reserve. It would expand our nature reserve significantly and expand the contiguous habitat that many of the species we'll be speaking about today rely on. And so I'm just curious if any of you might know, we're going to launch a poll here for you to take a guess. How many species at risk might be found at the Sauble Dunes North parcel? So the parcel in yellow here, is it A4, B19, C24, or D32? So we'll give you a couple of seconds, maybe 10 seconds to take a guess here. If you've been following us on social media, you might know this answer. We've been sharing some content about this webinar and this opportunity. But yeah, as you can see through this map here, there's quite a diversity of habitats throughout the property. So that might give you a bit of a hint. To the east, it looks a bit drier from what you can see, and to the west, you see more wetland habitat. So we have quite a variety of habitats here.
Smera, are you saying that this was a quiz for the social media followers?
Yeah.
See if they were paying attention? You're quizzing them?
And I think they came out strong. So the answer is 24. So 47% of people said 24 species at risk, and that is correct. So as Andrés said, a little quiz for those of you who follow us on social media. So yeah, 24 species at risk and 41 rare species have been observed here, including the threatened whippoorwill, endangered Massasauga rattlesnake, snapping turtles, and many more species. And also wanted to mention, this particular property is owned by a developer. So the opportunity here really is to protect this land from being developed. Right now it is natural and intact landscape. And so keeping that continuity of that natural habitat for the species that call this area home is the goal of this acquisition as well. And so in terms of the context, this is a really important corridor for many wildlife and species that come through this area, through the southern Saugeen Peninsula. You'll see here through this map kind of the adjacent properties. To the south and the west, you'll see that in pink, it's First Nation reserve land. And so again, really important for us to work collaboratively with the First Nation to ensure what their needs are, that they approve us moving forward with this process. And so that was very much a part of what we were doing throughout, from the time that we learned about this opportunity. We've been communicating with members of Saugeen Ojibwe Nation as well as Chief and Council about the opportunity, and with their approval, we're moving forward. So that's been really key for us, and also outlines, the area of natural landscape that's going to be contiguous with this property here. And then some of you may be familiar to the south, we have the Sauble Falls Provincial Park, and then to the northeast, the corridor extends to Boat Lake and the Rankin River. So a great contiguous parcel, creating that corridor for species to move through all the way up and through the peninsula from the Lake Huron shoreline. And just wanted to also mention, in terms of the goals for this property, Sauble Dunes isn't open to the public. As I mentioned earlier, half of our properties are and half aren't. And that's also due to the proximity to reserve lands and ensuring that we're maintaining the ecological integrity of this habitat. But do want to encourage those of you who are interested in visiting to keep an eye out on our mailing lists for opportunities to visit with us, with staff, as we move through, and maybe potentially, in the future when we have events there, we'd love to see you there, but it does not have a trail system for those reasons. And so in terms of the wetland ecosystems, there's quite a few wetlands coming through here, and this map basically depicts the provincially significant wetlands in orange. It's part of the Chiefs Point provincially significant wetlands, and there's 15 unevaluated wetlands on the site, as well as it protects the Sauble Falls North Life Science area of natural and scientific interest as well. And so in terms of the ecological values of the property, as I kind of pointed out a bit earlier, the eastern portion of the property is dune habitat, so forested dune habitat, mostly mixed forest with balsam fir and white birch and yellow birch as well. And interspersed are green and black ash swamps and many vernal pools dotted throughout that support breeding amphibian habitat as well. So we're going to launch our second poll to find out if you know a little bit about the species that actually rely on these vernal pools to breed. So we have on here which of these, so just keep in mind, this question is do not rely on these habitats to breed. So eastern redback salamander, we have spring peeper, we have gray tree frog, and spotted salamander. So I think many of you are going to be familiar with these species.
Calling all the herpers out there, everyone that has been chasing for salamanders during the spring, see what they think.
And this answer may surprise some of you. We'll see. Because I think we all think of amphibians relying on water for breeding.
Smera, I'm a bit hurt that panelists don't get to vote in the polls. I'm completely shut out here and I cannot participate in the polls.
It would be unfair. All right, so most people said gray tree frog. So actually the species that does not rely on ephemeral ponds or vernal pools is the eastern redback salamander. They're a lungless salamander that actually deposits their eggs under or in rotting logs or other moist environments on the forest floor. And so probably surprising because many of you are probably really familiar with eastern redback salamanders. They're one of the most commonly seen amphibian species. If you're, flipping logs and looking for them, obviously they are a bit cryptic, but yeah, hopefully learn something new there today.
Smera, there's a study from New York. It's a little old, needs to be updated, but they found that the most abundant biomass of animals in New York was redback salamanders, even most abundant than ants.
Yeah, wow, that's really interesting. Thanks for sharing, Andres. Yeah, so it's a call to look for these incredible critters in the woodlot next to you. And so in terms of vernal pools and these wetland ecosystems, protecting these habitats is really important. These small wetlands especially are really at risk of drying up sooner due to the impacts of climate change. And so maintaining the forest cover surrounding these wetlands ensures that the pools actually don't dry up too early and larval amphibians have a chance to metamorphose and emerge and survive. And so there's many more habitats found on the property. So on the western portion, there are various mineral marshes and treed swamps and open aquatic areas. And they support many species that we've already mentioned. So snapping turtle that we saw peeking out in the spring when we went for a quick site visit there. Canada warblers calling and porcupines climbing up trees. And when we were surveying the site and in one of the open wetlands, we suddenly heard a call that we thought sounded quite familiar, quite distinctive. Many of you are probably really familiar with it as well. And so we wanted to see if you might know what this the call of this species as well. And of course, it's pictured here. It's the iconic sandhill crane. And so we're going to launch our third and final poll here and see if any of you might know which of the following calls is a sandhill crane. So I'm going to play A first, and so I'll play all 4 calls, and then you'll have a chance to vote. So this is A. And then we're moving on to B. And then C. And lastly, D. I think many of you will be familiar with D. And so I'll just give you a second to kind of guess which of the following. So again, the question is, which of the following is the call of a sandhill crane that we were lucky enough to see when we were on the property? We visited in the spring, and it looked like they were, setting up some areas for nesting. And so it was a really exciting site.
But I think for the next one, we're going to have to raise the birding by ear challenge. We'll see the results here, but I'm starting to think that you threw an easy ball here.
Okay, we'll see. Ooh, it was a close tie between A, which was whooping crane, and B, which is the sandhill crane. So I think both of those, those are cranes, so very, very close. The third was a pileated woodpecker, and D was Canada goose. So some of you know your cranes well. All right. What do you think, Andreas? Make it harder next time?
Oh, absolutely. I'm going to be in charge of this quizzes next time when it comes to bird sounds. Like, yeah. But
happy to pass off the reins.
I like how you threw in the whooping crane, so it will kind of throw some people out. That's good.
So now we're going to showcase some incredible footage that our stewardship team captured at our Sauble Dunes Nature Reserve. So You'll see here pictured our nature reserves coordinator, stewardship coordinator Thorania, and Marcia, one of our volunteer stewards from the Owen Sound Field Naturalists, one of our nature network clubs, and club that cares for Sauble Dunes Nature Reserve in so many ways, setting up a wildlife camera to see what species are actually wandering through this nature reserve. And we know, given the contiguous habitats between the Sauble Dunes North parcel and the Sauble Dunes property, that many of the species captured through this camera are actually found on the Sauble Dunes North parcel as well. So while I set up with sharing this video, we'd like you to put in the chat what species you think have been observed using our wildlife cameras at Sauble Dunes. And again, to Andreas's point, this may be a social media quiz again, because some of you would have seen this video. So put in the chat what you think we found here, and already a bit of a hint here with this video.
Smera, we're already getting pretty awesome responses. Hello, dear friend Peter. We have fisher, we have red fox, we have deer, black bear fox. I think people have been paying attention to social media. I wonder what is the most outrageous answer we're going to get.
And we have incredible naturalists in our audience too, who just know the peninsula really well and know what species are found here. So a good combination.
Wait, Martha is offering some new candidates here. We have river otters and beavers.
Oh. All right, so we'll watch and see.
Some humans and snapping turtles. You ready?
Yeah, let's go.
I absolutely adore the thrushes in the sounds, but that all the animals were kind of going in the same direction. Clearly a highway over there, so good placing of those camera traps.
Yeah, kudos to Thorania and Marcia for. I asked Thorania, how did you decide where to place the trap? And she said, I felt like a bear. So it clearly worked. So love that. We have some incredible stewardship staff that dedicated a lot of time and effort into making sure that we're continuing to care for these places. So thanks for taking a peek with us. And yeah, now I'm going to pass it over to Andrés.
Thank you so much, Smera, and thank you for entertaining my commentary. It was lovely to participate on the questions. Hola, hello, bonjour, Ani, everyone, and thank you for joining us. It is fantastic to see so many names that I'm familiar with. Thank you all for coming. I feel like we are among friends, and we are among friends. We have an urgent opportunity before us to permanently protect, and people were asking about the size of this reserve, of these nature reserves. We have an opportunity to protect 66 acres of critical habitat along the Lake Huron shoreline by expanding our Sauble Dunes Nature Reserve. This land includes fen, marshes, dunes, swamp, and as someone that comes from a place where there's a lot of life, one of the most amazing surprises that I've experienced in Canada were the coastal dunes. They are absolutely incredible. And part of connecting this corridor in which wildlife relies on. Without protection, it is a real risk of being lost to development. It is currently owned by a developer. We're literally rescuing this land. We are already making great strides, and for those of you that are joining us and have already made a donation, thank you so much. With the support from the Government of Canada's Natural Heritage Conservation Program, and thanks to the generosity of individual donors, you know who you are, thank you so much, we raised over 235,000 thus far, which is more than halfway to our 400,000 goal. That includes about $70,000 from people like you who care deeply about keeping these wild spaces safe. Now, I have prepared a couple of questions for Smera, thinking about what the audience might be like thinking right now. And I want to share one of those now, Smera. You ready?
Yeah.
So when I started working on land securement, I found it fascinating. And when I see this presentation, I find fascinating the whole wealth of information you've given us. It's like you've been working in this property for 10 years. So what is the process and the key factors that go into defining what is a property that Ontario Nature will secure? And in this case, what tipped the scale?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think insight that many of our members would probably be looking for in terms of how we go about this, because there's so many interesting landscapes and properties across the province that are in dire need of protection. And so making the decision isn't always easy. At Ontario Nature, we take a science-based approach. We do assessments on each of the properties that come across our desk to determine whether they align with our strategic priorities and goals for the Nature Reserves program. And so specifically, we have priority regions across Southern Ontario where there are either gaps where other land trusts aren't able to act and protect lands that need protection, or there's just an incredible biodiversity of species where there's a need to further expand nature reserves. And so our priority areas currently are the Sydenham River watershed in southwestern Ontario, the Frontenac Arch in the east, and then of course the Saugeen Bruce Peninsula and Grey Bruce counties. So this property clearly fell within the Saugeen Bruce Peninsula geographic region, where we are having more of a focused effort for land securement and research and monitoring and stewardship activities. And specifically, a big bonus for us is adjacency to current nature reserves, because we're always looking to bolster and expand current protected areas because we have a good grasp of what species are found there, what habitats they rely on, and expanding that is critical as, you know, there's further development and we face the impacts of climate change. You know, we want to bolster the habitats that species are reliant on and expand those. Specifically for this property, obviously the adjacency to Sauble Dunes Nature Reserve was key. As we've already covered here today, over 24 species at risk have been found here. And so that really speaks to the diversity of habitats and different ecological niches that are found in the property. And so expanding upon that through this 66-acre addition is really key. And then, you know, it's a rare opportunity where it's intact natural habitat. There's, you know, some invasive species found on the property, and that's going to be key for us moving forward to restore the landscape so that we are, you know, having more native coverage. But apart from that, it, as you might have seen in the video, it's like quote unquote vacant land, right? So it's natural landscape, which is key for our nature reserve system, and that's kind of the goal, to support wild species and wild spaces. And of course, you know, having Saugeen Ojibwe Nation support was key in tipping the scale there. We needed to ensure, given the adjacency to reserve land, that they were supportive of us moving forward, because we wouldn't have without that.
And I've come to understand that expanding the nature reserves becomes a priority as well, because there is a support system of nature stewards and a community in place there to make sure that those places are stewarded. Correct?
Yeah. So as I mentioned, and in one of the photos, you kind of saw one of our volunteer stewards, Marsha, and many other stewards or past stewards are on the call today, on the webinar today. So they're intimately familiar with these properties. We couldn't manage and protect and monitor these properties without them. They are eyes and ears on the ground. Many of them are our nature network members or simply neighbors to our nature reserves, and they help with everything from monitoring species, doing some specific surveys, putting up wildlife cameras, letting us know, for example, if there's trails on the property, if there's issues with them. So they're incredible naturalists, many of them themselves. So we learn so much from them about the properties and the species that are found there too.
So, Smera, you mentioned that there are First Nations adjacent to this property, and for those of us that have never presented to Chief and Council, is there something that you can share regarding how they received this request? Why was this important for them?
Yeah, so any potential acquisition we look into, we connect with First Nations whose traditional territories lie in that area because we want to ensure that we're proceeding with support from the communities and also exploring opportunities for partnerships if we do proceed. And so in this particular case, given the direct adjacency to reserve land, it was really important that we spoke with community members and leadership, so chief and council, to ensure that we did move forward in a good way. And so we were really lucky in this situation that we have some good relationships with community members who guided how we approached moving forward with chief and council, and ultimately shared a lot of what was shared today in terms of the ecological value of the property, potential culturally important species, opportunities to protect this land from potential development. And given the adjacency to reserve land, that was key as well. And ensuring that, throughout the process, it really was a more personal approach. Ontario Nature and myself, we feel a deep responsibility for any lands that are part of our nature reserve system. Acquisition really is the first step. We care for these lands in perpetuity, and we do not take that lightheartedly. So ensuring that we work collaboratively with rights holders, First Nation communities, Indigenous communities, neighbors, volunteers, our members, to really care for these properties in a way that makes sense for those of us around us and the species that rely on them.
You're talking a lot about care, and in many cases, we see a whole bunch of different groups securing land, buying it. But what happens after Ontario Nature secures land? And why is it so much more than just buying a property? Why is securing top environmental quality such a key part of the process?
Yeah, so I mean, understanding the landscape is key to caring for it, right? So seeing what's on the land. And so we do that through a number of ways. Going back to your original question about kind of how we assess lands and how we determine what we might add to our nature reserve system, we first start off with a desktop analysis to look at, aerial imagery and data that's available about species. So it's purely like a desktop exercise to see what species are found there, as well as adjacency. So the importance of creating corridors for wildlife, as was highlighted in this presentation as well. So looking at that data as the first step, and then obviously getting out on the land. You don't get to know a property or a landscape without actually being out there. And so that's really key. We have some incredible naturalists and as stewards, as well as incredible nature enthusiasts and biologists on staff. So we really rely on them to help us, ensure that we fully understand the ecological integrity of the land and get to verify what we've seen through the desktop piece. And so knowing whether a landscape is intact or it's degraded in some way helps us understand what the needs might be of the landscape and the species that call it home. So in this case, for example, noting that there are some invasive species on the property, we are keeping in mind that if we're able to secure it, one of the first things we'll do is manage those invasive species to ensure that we're restoring critical wetland habitat um, for the reptiles and birds that rely on them.
And what I'm understanding here is that if we buy a wetland and then it becomes frag infested and turtles get caught in it and then die, it would not be of as much value as it could be. And that's why in some cases I see that when we buy land, there's a burst of productivity, right? A lot of people wanna get to know and connect and buy the land. And sometimes we forget, same as when we plant a tree, that we need to go there and visit and keep that tree going in order for it to be healthy. And I want to leave it a little time for Q&A. So I have one final question for you, Smera. And I'm so grateful that I get to talk with the amazing, passionate, and smart people in Interior Nature. What would you say to someone who's unsure about contributing to the securement of these lands because they live far away and feel their support might be more impactful closer to home or where they can access it?
Yeah, I mean, I'm grateful that we have so many different members joining from all across the province and supporters. I mean, Ontario is a connected landscape, and the species that, are found on this property are truly unique. The habitats found there are truly unique, and it's an ecological gem. And so some of the species that you heard about today either migrate or travel from maybe where you're located. So given it's all a connected landscape, protecting something in your neighborhood or your backyard or your community is a win for nature. And so is something that might be further afield. And so it's important to keep that kind of in mind as we make these kinds of decisions. But certainly we love that our members are, tapped into the needs of their own communities and are looking to support local efforts because it's all contributing to protecting conservation efforts across the province. But yeah, curious to hear your thoughts, Andres.
Yeah, I always imagine each one of the properties as part of the matrix of safety that is required for nature to thrive. And it is not about just securing place like properties in one site. We need everything. Even though we don't visit all of these places, or I might never visit Saugeen Peninsula, I can think about the communities that then have nature connection there and that will start caring about nature in the future just because they access that property. And then those communities might in turn support me when I'm thinking about securing land closer to me. So thank you, Snera. People, this is a chance to make a permanent difference. By giving today, you're not just donating, you're ensuring that these wetlands and forests and dunes remain intact for species at risk, for climate resilience, and for future generations. Please take a moment to protect your share of the Sauble Dunes Nature Reserve expansion. Every gift, no matter the size, brings us closer to safeguarding this irreplaceable habitat forever. Together, we can close the gap. We are guardians for nature together. Thank you for helping us reach these milestones and for standing with nature. And now I would like to welcome back Melina Amian.
Okay, what a fantastic presentation. Thank you both. We have great questions in the Q&A chat. So somebody was asking, they want to learn more about our work in our nature reserves, and they're wondering, how does the monitoring program work? And does it entail mainly tagging species and providing summaries to policymakers?
Yeah, it's a great question. So property management is integral to our stewardship of our properties across the province. And so we collaboratively develop management plans for each of our properties with our volunteers and conservation partners and neighbors and everyone who's involved in a specific property. And so it outlines kind of what our conservation targets are. So in some cases, it might be a specific wetland ecosystem that's a provincially significant wetland, or it might be a species at risk, like a Massasauga rattlesnake. And from that, we would have some actions associated with each of our targets. So for example, for that Massasauga rattlesnake, it might be doing surveys, every few years to ensure how many we're seeing. Is there any breeding evidence, for example? Because if there was, and then now we're not seeing breeding evidence, then we notice that something has changed and we might need to act or do something differently. We also, for example, if there's a habitat like for example, Pelee Island, we have a restoration project down there where we have open alvar habitat that's, being encroached in by woody species and, is actually the amount of habitat that's integral for the species at risk that rely on those habitats is decreasing, then we apply for funding and we look for opportunities with researchers to actually restore that habitat through, for example, a prescribed burn. So it can take many different forms, and we're always consistently learning about this species and the habitats found on our properties and are always adapting the way that we are actually managing them. And so that's key through all of our nature reserves, and it's very unique in terms of what we do on each one.
Excellent. Thanks so much. Heidi's asking a question about conservation authorities, since the government pretty much reduced their power. So how does Ontario Nature work? Cooperatively with conservation authorities, or are they basically reduced to very little power in terms of working with us?
Yeah, so I can start, and then Andrés, I'm sure you'll have something to add regarding conservation authorities as well. But specifically, I'll speak specifically to our nature reserves program because I think across what we do in terms of the breadth of Ontario nature is quite wide. But we do work collaboratively with conservation authorities. Specifically, many CAs own and manage and protect lands close to our nature reserves. So, for example, if they might have reduced capacity right now, we might support by way of monitoring or collaborating on stewardship activities on their lands. We also collaborate for species at risk monitoring as well as invasive species management. We're part of several collaborative working groups with conservation authorities where we're seeking funding to support some of the activities they maybe would have had as their core mandate previously, but isn't supported anymore, but finding a way to ensure that we're all able to maintain the natural integrity of the landscapes within their watersheds. And I just want to keep it brief, but that's one of the couple of ways, but we do work collaboratively with CAs where our nature reserves lie for sure.
A lot of the work we do with conservation authorities goes beyond our nature reserves work, and a lot of it comes through the creation of reports and toolkits that can help with wise planning and management of natural resources. Our advocacy team does a lot of work with bringing wise management practices for wetlands to municipalities and conservation authorities, and that's an expanded work from what Smera just shared.
Great. Thank you. We have a really good question from Susan, who is asking, how do you scale resources to support stewardship of new properties in perpetuity?
Yeah, so part of our fundraising is to support long-term stewardship and care. So it's not just acquiring the property. We do also set aside some funding to support long-term management of these nature reserves and invest some of that money to ensure that we get a return annually where it's guaranteed for us to have some income to ensure that we are able to steward these properties in the long term. And we also continually apply for funding and look for funding opportunities to take on some of these restoration projects and specific needs. And of course, also rely heavily on our volunteer network. We're so grateful to them for stewarding our nature reserves that we're not maybe able to get to as frequently as they are, given they're direct neighbors of our nature reserves too.
I think it's important to add that every time someone becomes a member of Ontario Nature or support us with monthly donations, this is part of the support that goes directly to keeping the work for our nature reserves. And it is so absolutely critical for us to have that work because, yeah, many donors and funders think, all right, yeah, let's secure this land and we'll give an early amount of money. But then you cannot go, or many donors are not open to you continue to submit proposals through the years to keep that nature going. But as Mera mentioned, the most important thing is to support that nature to continue going. And so it is the people here that join as monthly donors that are the lifeline for the continued stewardship of these properties.
Thank you so much. And we have a couple of questions from people who want to see the map again. So maybe, Smera, if you want to go back to that slide, they want to see the area that we're hoping to protect. And also someone asked, how large is the current property in yellow?
So the current property is actually, I don't know if you can see my cursor, it's the one in red, and then the potential acquisition is the one in yellow. So the current one is 77 hectares, and the yellow one is 26.
Okay, thanks so much. And we have a question from Cam who's asking, when you purchase pieces of land, how do you ensure that governments don't come and take it over for buildings or expansion or development?
Well, that's the beauty of us being a land trust that owns the land. We can control, exactly what happens within that parcel. And so we wouldn't have that issue in this particular case. For example, if in a rare case where there's, a road being expanded or something like that, there may be a small degradation of habitat, but then there would be like a remediation project that goes associated with that. But Ontario Nature is committed to ensuring the protection of the lands that we own. We have title to those lands, and so any sort of development project or anything like that would have to go through us, and we're committed to ensuring the ecological value and integrity, so we would do everything to ensure that wouldn't happen. But this is a very, very rare case that I mentioned. It doesn't happen on our nature reserves.
So, Smera, there are some questions and comments in the chat about the likelihood of us buying this because it's owned by a developer. Can you explain a little bit of the logistics when we bring an appeal forward? Why is it that we're certain that we can secure this property as long as we fundraise for it?
Yeah, so part of the process is entering into a legal agreement called an agreement of purchase and sale. And so that's been entered into. And so we can confirm that, as long as we raise the funds, that we would own the property outright. And so when we launch these fundraising appeals, we have that level of certainty associated with it. There's already been the conversations with the landowners, and we've already figured out any issues that might come up. And so when we get to this phase, it's a certain thing as long as we're able to get all the money that we need to protect the land.
Got it. Thanks so much. Teresa's asking a really good question about Bill 5. So the question is, how concerning is the recent Ford government's Bill 5 an announcement that the Endangered Species Act will no longer have protections? How will this affect the work that we do?
Would you like me to take on that one, Smera? It is very concerning. It should be concerning for everyone, and that's why Ontario Nature is going to continue aiming to repeal Bill 5, which Bill 5 is a bit deceiving in a sense because it is now a law. We refer to it as Bill 5 because Bill 5 affects many laws. So it would be very complicated to mention all the laws that were changed due to Bill 5. Why is it concerning? Because we don't have clarity on how can the government define a special economic zone. And according to how it is defined right now, they could declare an economic zone at your home. And it could be at this reserve, it could be anywhere. So that's why we're working hard. We think it's undemocratic and takes away the rights of communities to participate and define the type of development and conservation they want on the lands adjacent to them. But then it becomes the issue of the elimination of the Species of Risk Act and the washed down version that is now put into place. That is really concerning because it mostly affects the home range of species outside of protected areas. So if outside that yellow and red line before someone, or let's say that yellow line that is owned by a developer, if at that yellow line owned by a developer, someone would have found a Blanding's turtle, it used to trigger an automatic protection of 2 kilometers around that sighting. And that meant that all the habitat that might be required with that Blanding's turtle was protected, even though there was a development project going into it. Right now, the new Species of Risk Act is not called like that. Sorry, I don't remember the name right now. But the Species of Risk Act that was put in place defines that habitat as the immediate dwellings. So that means that there will have to be a very particular hibernaculum of the snake, completely proven there, for it to have any sort of protection. And so you might imagine that one of the reasons we secure land is to make sure that the species of risks that are there are going to be protected. Though, if we don't take care of the species outside protected areas and their homes there, then the species inside or the individuals inside the protected areas are going to be at risk because simply they won't have any mates and they won't have any way to move on the landscape. And that is why we're committed to bringing challenges to this bill and to the laws that will change. And we will continue to advocate for nature. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, thanks, Andres. Doug is asking, over what period of time can a donation be made before the window closes?
That's a Kirsten question.
Okay, we can.
Maybe Kirsten, can you unmute yourself?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm sitting outside. There's a whole bunch of geese around me, so
Oh, we would love to hear the geese too.
we don't have a hard deadline for this, but we are hoping to raise the money before the end of the year. So we'll be accepting donations right through till December.
Thanks, Kirsten. That's helpful. And on that note, Leanne is asking, if money is raised for this but not enough to buy the property, what happens to the money?
Sorry, can you repeat that question? If money's raised for this but not enough to buy the property, what happens to the money?
Yeah.
Well, this is the thing. Even though that is a scenario that we always contemplate, we are very confident that we will make the amount that we need to make to fulfill our commitment with the developer as part of the agreement of purchase and sale. Right now, we're at $235,000, and we're closer than ever to that 400 target. And we're very comfortable that we're confident that we're going to make it there. And if not, we have plan B, C, and D to make sure that we can ensure that the money comes in.
Thanks so much, Andres. Stan is asking, will you have long-term programs or partnerships with the local First Nations, such as seed collection for restoration or tree planting or invasive species management?
Yeah, I can tackle this one. So we have relationships and partnerships with certain members of SON to do just that. Actually, just a couple weeks ago, some members went and did some seed collection on one of our other properties. We collaborate on salamander monitoring at some of our nature reserves. We're also actively applying for funding for future stewardship activities on some of our other nature reserves. And in terms of invasive species management, so for example, when we are doing Phragmites management on any of our properties, we seek approval from Saugeen and Ojibwe Nation before doing so as well, just to make sure we're all on the same page in terms of the ways that we're approaching these activities. So certainly, you know, an ongoing relationship and always looking for more opportunities to collaborate both with the local First Nations as well as local communities in any ways that we can.
Thanks so much, Smera. And I see that it's already 12:01 and we want to be respectful of your time. So maybe we'll do 2 more questions and we'll wrap it up there. Emily is asking, saying, I'm a recent graduate from an ecological restoration program. I was wondering if there are any internship or volunteer opportunities we can partake in, or how else we can help. Thanks, Emily. That's exciting that you're joining. I can share that we have a volunteer program. It's on our website, and if you subscribe to the newsletter, we send opportunities every month. But maybe if Smera has anything to add to that, that'd be great.
Yeah, and we've given a huge shout out to our volunteer stewards a few times during this webinar. So if you're interested, if you're located somewhere near a nature reserve or are interested in joining, our volunteer stewards are incredible and so knowledgeable. So it's a great opportunity to learn from one another on the land together and do some exciting work. And in terms of actually hiring for some of these amazing jobs that people get to do, where they actually get to go out to the properties and do some of these surveys, we post them early in the new year. So please keep an eye out through our mailing list for those opportunities, and get in touch. We'd love to hear from you. And congrats.
Awesome. Thanks so much. Okay, last question before we wrap up. This is a fun question. Janet is asking, how do vernal pools form? May such a pool be called also ephemeral ponds? And why does it take so long for a vernal pool to drain?
Do you want me to take this one, Andres?
Yeah, go ahead, Smera.
So yeah, vernal pools are actually just natural depressions in forest floors. Ephemeral pool, vernal pool means the same thing. It just means that it's not around forever. And so the idea of these vernal pools is that they form through snow melt, or just like rain collection in that kind of depression. And so because of the unique nature of that, it's a predator-free environment, and that's why so many amphibians really rely on these habitats. They're not dealing with fish eating all their eggs, and there are, of course, other predators that may come about, but it's a relatively predator-free environment compared to, let's say, a stream. And also because it's still water, it's easier for egg masses, for example, to hold on to fallen debris like a log rather than like a moving water body as well. So a few advantages to these pools. Depending on the size of the pool, how long it takes to dry up. Some don't actually dry up completely. It just depends on the size and the depth. Some of the smaller ones dry up really quickly. And so, you know, and a lot of amphibians do have fidelity, so that just means that they go back to the same place where they were born, for example. Not all species do this, but a lot do. And so they kind of know from that historical rewiring and innate knowledge that they would go back to the same pool where they were born so that they can ensure that it'll have the hydro period or stay wet for as long as they need to metamorphose. Because of course, different species take different lengths of time to metamorphose from the larval stage to then emerge. So there's a lot of different factors there. And I think it's just incredible because there's so much we don't know as well with these species. But so yeah, the answer is sometimes they dry out, sometimes they don't, depends on the size of the pool. But with the importance of these habitats, you know, maintaining the ecosystem surrounding them is really key to ensure that we give them a fighting chance. If it's, you know, there's no trees around it, they're going to dry up a lot faster.
They are the most amazing and fun thing ever. And I want to share something I recently learned by joining our staff at a nature reserve restoration event. So vernal pools take hundreds of years to form because, as Smera said, this is the natural thing that is happening into mature forest. Maybe a tree falls and then the roots start rotting and then a depression is formed. But forming depressions is not something that happens commonly. And so it form in a forest. And I was at the Sydenham Nature Reserve and we were trying to plant the forest for the next 100 years. And I started seeing some holes. And I was like, why do we have holes here? And then Marcus, shout out to Marcus, explained to me that we make the vernal pools for the future. And so where we're trying to restore a forest, we make some depressions to simulate that structure of the soil in the forest. So when it is a forest in 100 years, we don't have to wait for the formation of vernal pools. And I found that absolutely amazing. And it's something that really sets out Ontario Nature apart for me.
That's so exciting. Thank you both for sharing that. It's a good time to wrap up here. There's so many great questions. Thank you everybody for participating. We're sorry that we couldn't answer all of them, but I added a link in the chat if you'd like to learn more about this project. You'll also receive an email right after, a few days after when the webinar is available with our contact information. If you have more questions, we're always happy to help. Thanks again to Andres and Smera for such an exciting presentation, and to everybody for joining today and participating. And we hope you have a wonderful day, and we'll see you soon again.